This is an Abundant Insight. I'm Carl Meyer, your host. I'm the CEO of Abundant. Today, I've got John Stacy with AdvoCoach with me. AdvoCoach is short for advisory coach. And today we're going to be talking about a case study, a situation where John was trying to help a client grow and the challenges that they had along the way. Welcome, John.
Well, good morning, Carl. Good to see you this morning.
You too. I'm excited to hear a little bit more about the situation. So how did you get introduced to, or how did you meet this opportunity?
Well, actually, I know the CFO. I've known him for about 20 years. He was new to the company. He had been there for about a year, and he knew what I was doing. And as he was talking to me, because we have lunch every once in a while, he really kind of talked through the situation, provided me some information, and really wanted to find out what we could do to help this organization. It was a fast-growing organization, but they had a lot of challenges.
So what were some of the challenges that you perceived or you were hearing when you were talking with the CFO?
Well, as I was talking to him, he really got me set up with the CEO. We spent some time on the phone to really understand what kind of challenges he was having. And the company started in the mid 2004, 2005. They've grown to $50 to $60 million, which is pretty substantial growth when it comes down to it. But he was having challenges. And the reason he started the company was the IT company he was with just didn't really have the same beliefs and philosophy that he had when it comes to taking care of clients. So he started his own company, and it's grown very rapidly, which is pretty exciting. When we start looking at the things that we talked about, there was really four things that were specific that he needed to have worked on. And I'm not sure he knew exactly where he was, but I think there's a good book called No Man's Land, because that's kind of where he was. And the four things really came down to sales processes. Number one, sales compensation. If you looked at how much compensation they were paying, it was substantially more, like about 15 points more than what a normal company, IT company would be paying. Substantial impact on the growth because for the cash that they had to use to pay the additional compensation really had another thing had to do with meetings. He was being meeting to death. And some of that challenge, and we can get into it a little bit, he was trying to manage the company the same today as he was when it was $10 million. So he had to go to every meeting. He had to be there for every decision. And so instead of doing strategy types of things and meeting with high-level customers and really focused on what he needed to grow the business, he was always in meetings and he couldn't get out of it. And just in talking to the CFO, some of the meetings were frustrating because here you got the executive team that are talking about how much paper they're buying or how many paper clips. Total waste of time. But he wasn't able to get out of having these meetings. And so that was part of the discussion. And the other part really was alignment. And I think that you see a lot of companies that have an alignment issue when it comes to people. Having people, kind of talk about people in the right seats, doing the right thing at the right time. And really had some challenges. And it came down, as we're talking, about loyalty. Some of these people had been with him for, really early on in the startup phase, and we're with him today, but they really hadn't grown. So they were in positions, they hadn't grown, and they were holding them back. And loyalty, I think, is really great when it comes down to it. But as a leader, it really comes down to you still have to have the right people in the right seats.
Right.
And sometimes you need to make some hard decisions.
Right. I think that's an excellent observation. One of the things I've observed is loyalty is very important, but loyalty to your cause can really be much more beneficial than just blind loyalty to your person. It's not that you want to be disloyal to that person. You want to treat them fairly, but loyalty to a cause takes you a lot further, is my experience. Well, good. Well, those sound like some good challenges. Some of them are very common. We talked about sales procedures. That's a very common challenge. See that with a lot of companies as you grow. I mean, every time you double, everything breaks, you outgrow your procedures. So that's a natural thing. Is that the type of thing you saw with the procedures?
Yeah, for me, and really, it was across the board when it came down to it. It was all about documentation. So, how do you consistently do the same, build the company the same way, that consistency, and you hire someone new, and since you have no processes in place or documented process, everybody learns something a little different. And now he did bring in some senior leadership along the road. However, he's still so engaged with the senior leadership. So he brings in a VP of sales. Great. Okay. Except that he's got to be involved with every decision. And at some point in time, you got to back out and set expectations for the business, set expectations for that leader, set up, the expectations for the team. And if you don't do that and then step back, you've got to allow your people, you hire someone for a reason. You hired them to accomplish something, and you've got to allow them to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that can be kind of a chicken and egg situation in my experience. Even if you want to let go, it's scary to let go. What will happen? Will everything fall apart? And I think that also kind of comes back to the processes, like you were saying, that if you've got the processes and the people in place, that makes it easier to start delegating.
I think you make a really good point, Carl. And I think as you start talking about that, you see a lot of leaders, what they do is say, okay, I've hired this person. This person is going to do this. And then go, okay, I'm done. You do that. And there has to be some kind of transition. You're going to have this feeling that I'm giving up control and I don't want to do that. And I don't trust them yet. Well, if you just say go do it without some kind of transition and making sure that they are consistently following up on what they need to be doing, then you're going to have that. So that transition period when you hire someone is critical. And it's not so easy. It's like, okay, I'm done. I'm good to go. Well, no, it's not. It's not that easy. I wish it was.
Right. Yeah. It's finding the balance between I'm done, you handle it, and I'm never going to let go. So that's a tough challenge. Did this entrepreneur ever kind of make that leap and let go?
Still making the transition through that. It's not, again, it's not something, it's your baby. And it's not something that they're able to really give up with very easily. So that becomes an ongoing challenge. So that whole leadership perspective is probably one of the challenges. And when you start talking about that, and I'm going to go back to that book, The No Man's Land, one of the 5 things to focus on is really, outgrowing your management or building the team the way you need to do it. And that's a hard transition for an entrepreneur that directs everything, as opposed to the person that says, okay, I know I need to change, and this is my plan on how I'm going to change.
Right. Yeah, having a plan, kind of a transition plan. I mean, businesses, you go up and you get to a certain point, and then you've got to change. Once heard an entrepreneur tell me, I think I already said it, that every time you double, everything breaks. And so, I think you mentioned they were at 50 million, and in many ways they're running it like a $10 million company, and it just, it doesn't fit anymore. So, and that can be reflected in processes and delegation. And you mentioned meetings. So how, was there any way you were, kind of trying to work with the entrepreneur on dealing with the meeting situation?
Well, so some of this is really kind of some one-on-one that we're doing to make sure that we're starting to make changes. And sometimes you have to just ask the question, why are you doing it this way? Why is this happening? What do you expect if you eliminated this meeting every Tuesday morning at 9:30 and you get together and talk? I'm joking, but talking about paper clips for 2 hours. One, is that adding value? And do you really need to do that? So they're having multiple senior team meetings. Well, that doesn't make sense. So I'm going to say, in general, all business owners know exactly what they need to do. All business owners ignore the fact that they know that, and they're going to do what they want to do. So some of this is just really asking people, is what you're getting done? What's the intention? What do you want to accomplish? What do you have to do to change that? And so you've got to change the mindset of the owner at that point. And you just can't stop, because all his management team is used to it. And so it really comes down to really making sure they understand where they're going. And I'm a big planner, so I'll admit that. Some people are not. But if you have a plan and then you can measure it, that's why we talk about KPIs. And I'll tell you that they had implemented part of Traction, or at some point in time they implemented all of Traction, and over time stuff goes away, and so they really didn't have a KPI scorecard anymore. So there's some things that part of that is, that made sense back when we were 10 million, but we don't have time to do it now. Well, is it a priority? Okay, let's really define what the priorities are of the business, because if we can define the priorities and the KPIs, a plan becomes pretty easy, because you're measuring what you're trying to accomplish.
Right. What's the saying? If you don't measure it, you can't manage it. So, yeah. And
I had a boss that a number of years ago that had come out of real process orientation out of Motorola, and key comment: you measure what you value. That has stuck with me forever, because when it comes down to it, if it's important to you, you're going to measure it. If it's not important, it doesn't. You're not going to measure it. So you measure what you value.
That's right. And I think, my experience is what you value changes over time. At some point it's, wow, I've got to acquire, it's about acquire customers, deliver the product, collect the money. But, at some point as the owner, the entrepreneur, now it's really about managing people. And so I've got a whole different perspective in there.
And I would say there's another aspect to that you didn't mention, Carl, because your point is that things that I'm trying to accomplish or what's important to me change over time. And so part of when I'm talking to people is not only are we talking about your business, but we're also talking about what you're trying to accomplish personally, because you really can't separate those two things. Those two things are interrelated. The business is generally the largest asset that individual has. And so if what they're trying to do on the business side doesn't link up to what they're trying to do on their personal side, they're just out of sync, and they're not going to accomplish either goal. So it really comes down, you've got to focus on both of those pieces. Those are two important pieces in our lives.
Right. One of the things that I find is that if you actually kind of say it out loud, write it down, share it, it sounds different when you say it out loud than when you just kind of say it in your head. When you tell it to somebody else, it's more of a commitment, but it's also, the kind of logical problems in the situation, the inconsistency between my personal and my business goals really come out a lot different. So, where was the entrepreneur ever, kind of receptive to using, some sort of business plan tool?
Yeah, that's exactly where I wanted to go. So it's about setting goals, and I think that there's a number of studies out there that are pretty interesting, because a lot of us sit there and say, okay, I want to accomplish this, but we never write it down. The interesting stat on that is about 37, 38, you increase your odds of accomplishing that if you take it from your mind and write it down, which to me is pretty significant. The other interesting part, though, that 37, 38% goes to 80% if you have an accountability partner, okay? And accountability partner can be a lot of different people, but just think about it, didn't accomplish, and if we had just taken the time to write it down and have someone we can talk to hold us accountable, we get 80% of the time we're going to accomplish it. Wow, that's pretty amazing.
That is, yeah, from 30 something to 80. That's a huge shift.
It's only from taking it from your mind to writing it down like you were talking about, but then that extra part of having someone hold you accountable.
Right. To me, that leads towards management meeting. And I know your entrepreneur was kind of meetinged to death. Did they have regular, management meetings that really were focused on the high level issues?
Yeah, they have those on a weekly basis. One of the things they really didn't have too much was an agenda. And a lot of times meetings have a tendency to take the amount of time. If you say you're going to have a meeting from 3:30 to 5:30, your meeting is going to be from 3:30 to 5:30. I think that there's some level of intentionality that we have to have at a meeting when it comes down to it. If you have an agenda, people know what the expectation is. You can take a 2-hour meeting to an hour meeting and accomplish more if you really can focus as an organization. What happens at meetings? People come in late, then people have to kibitz, talk a little bit and say how everybody's doing. And then the whole discussion can kind of go a lot of different ways. And there's really maybe not a whole lot of value to the discussion. And I'm not saying discussion is bad. Discussion on the right topics is good. But a lot of times people just get off target and we're way over here. And it doesn't add any value, and it just takes away time from what we could be accomplishing something.
Completely agree. Completely agree. Abundance, and I think you share this, thought that a structured meeting is so much more valuable than just hey, why are we here again? So that's really good insight. And do you think that they're going to be receptive to implementing a more structured management meeting, or did you get some pushback on that?
No, there's no pushback. Again, the owner really knows, again, like I said, knows what they need to do. Sometimes you just need a little bit of push, or someone asking the question, again, why are you doing it? Is there something different you could do? Can we do it this way? Why don't we restructure it and communicate? And so when it comes down to it, I started talking about outgrowing your management. That really comes down to me, leadership and communication. And a lot of times, for a leader doesn't communicate. I've got some other things we could talk about in different companies. Leaders seem to think that if they think it's going to be like communicated to everybody. It doesn't work that way. No one has mental telepathy. And so when it comes down to it, we really need to focus on the communication and make sure that the communication from a team perspective goes out throughout the organization. But as far as pushback, no pushback. It's all about refocusing our efforts on accomplishing those things that are important to us.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So once we've identified some things that are important, say, you're working with this entrepreneur, there's behaviors that need to, we say, okay, that's important. That's something we want to focus on. To accomplish anything like that, it's changing behavior.
Correct.
That's my experience. So was there one particular behavior that you can think of with this entrepreneur that you were trying to encourage them to change, that, does anything like that particularly come to mind? Maybe you had some conversations or used some tools to try and actually change that behavior?
Not so much tools, but just really talking about priorities. And in the conversation, sometimes you get into these discussions about, well, I don't have time to do this. So you ask the question, well, is it a priority? Well, yeah, it's a priority. And what I found in life is, if it's truly a priority, we're going to figure out how to do it. If we say it's a priority, but we're not doing it, that says it's really not a priority. And so it really comes down to what do we prioritize, and then working with them on a regular basis. Guess what? You don't change behavior overnight. And so it really comes down to having multiple conversations. And you know what? Everything was going well, and then something happened. Well, what was the roadblock? What happened? What would you have done differently, or what could you have done differently? So you have some of these discussions related to how could, as we're changing our behavior, how can we consistently go down this path?
Absolutely.
So it's a lot of reminders and accountability.
Right. Yes. What, they say 30 to 60 days to, change a habit. So, and that's with a pretty focused effort. So yes, that makes a lot of sense. I do like your point about, it's going fine until there's a roadblock. It's kind of like, my diet was going fine until, I got really stressed out about whatever. And then I had to go get a little dessert,
Oh, yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about.
But how do we, not just overcome the smooth points in the road, but the bumps in the road as well?
Well, and so some of the things I think from a tool perspective then becomes what books are out there that, whether it's you, whether it's some members of the team, how can we use some development tools, books, reading those types of things that can help people understand where we're trying to go. So based upon the challenge or based upon the person, then you may do some things to have them read a book. Some of the ones that I like when it comes to focus is The One Thing by Keller, and I think that's a really good book to help you really think about what you want to accomplish in life, and both personally and from a business perspective. So that kind of helps channel people in thinking about if they really can spend time, and we talk about what did you learn from the book, and we start putting those into practice, that really helps people move forward towards whatever they're trying to accomplish. So that's one of them. There's a number of really good books out there, whether it's Traction or Mastering the Rockefeller Habits or Scaling Up. There's a number of those books that are more business related about how do you grow a business, how do you scale a business up. And I think for a lot of people that have gone from 1 million to 5 to 10 to 50, they've been able to do it in a lot of cases without a lot of development. They may bring their people with them, but I think the development aspect of it from a people perspective, kind of go back to that loyalty piece, everybody's got to up their game. And I kind of talk about the skill set of $1 million owner is different than a $20 million owner, is different than a $100 million owner and a $200 million owner. So when it comes down to it, if you're not up in your game, if you're not increasing your skill sets, then you're not going to be able to be brought along. And let's face it, it's kind of like if you talk football, it's Texas. So, it's high school football season. Well, there's football players that are really good in high school, and some of those will go to Division I and play really good football. And some of those will go to the pros. But the guys that were really good in high school maybe didn't make it to college, and the guys that are really good in college maybe don't make it to the NFL. The fact of the matter is our skill set, what we need to how we need to accomplish something changes. And if we don't up our skill set, we're not going to the big leagues.
I think that's so true. I think that's a really well said point. And just to kind of follow on with that, the skill set, needs to be supported by the team, needs to be supported by the tools, the systems. It all goes together. Having your cell phone is great when it's just you and one or two other people, but by the time you're to some number of people, all of a sudden you need a phone system. So you need the whole suite of support system to make it there. So yeah, that's a great observation. I appreciate that. Good. So what do you see in the future for this client? Do you see continued growth? See some good opportunities there?
Yeah, I think in the next couple of years that they're going to be north of $100 million company. I mean, there's just a lot of positive things going on as long as they can make those changes, continue to make those changes. Because again, we just said the $50 million company is different than 100. So you might be able to get to 100, but then you still have the same challenges. And again, going back to that no man's land, I think there's 4 or 5 points that need to be made about that. As a company, outgrowing your money. Okay, if you don't have access to cash and you want to go from 60 to 100, that ends up being a challenge. Another one is outgrowing your model. The service model that you have today may work today, especially in the IT world. If that doesn't change over the next X amount of years, they can only go to a certain point. So outgrowing your model, outgrowing your management, which we've really talked about a lot. I think that's one of the biggest keys to this. And then it's really how are you building market or market development? If you're only building it in Houston, Austin, San Antonio, part of that expansion that you can have is going to have to increase outside of, say, Texas. And to do that, what does that look like? And do we have the bandwidth and the skill set to be able to scale that? Because how you scale that's different than scaling just in Houston.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Scaling. Yeah. Every time you kind of take that next leap, it's a whole new situation where you've outgrown some of the perhaps people, systems, processes that you've been using, and you have to re-examine and see what needs to change. Well, sounds like the future's bright for your client, and sounds like a lot of fun for you.
It is a lot of fun, and after 40 years of business, it's really fun to be able to help people kind of see the light in what they can do to just increase their success. And that's the exciting thing to me right now, is being able to see that and be able to help people really scale their business.
I'm sure you'll keep on doing that. Wish you continued success, and sounds like a lot of fun. Well, I appreciate you spending the time with us here today. We learned a lot from your insights in this edition of Abundant Insights. So thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Carl. Thank you very much.